It was late at night when officers at a quiet police station noticed something unusual. A small French bulldog sprinting through the rain, his paws muddy, his eyes full of desperation. He wasn't just lost. He was begging for help. What happened next would reveal a story of loyalty, pain, and an unforgettable bond that no one saw coming. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and turn on notifications so you never miss more emotional and inspiring stories like this one. The rain came down in heavy sheets that evening, drenching the small town of Riverside until the streets glistened like dark mirrors under the streetlights. The police station, a modest brick building tucked between an old bakery and a hardware store, sat quiet. Inside, Officer Michael Turner, a man in his early 40s with a calm demeanor shaped by years of service, was finishing paperwork at his desk. It had been an uneventful night so far, just the sound of rain against the windows and the occasional static from the radio. But then the silence broke. A scratching noise echoed faintly from the glass doors at the station's entrance, followed by a sharp bark, short, desperate, unlike anything Michael had heard before in his shifts. He frowned, set down his pen, and walked to the front. Through the rain-streaked glass, he saw a small, black French bulldog, its fur plastered to its frail body, shivering violently. The dog's eyes locked onto his as if pleading for something urgent. Michael opened the door, and in a rush of cold air and wet paws, the little bulldog scrambled inside, dripping water across the tiled floor. Michael knelt down. "Hey there, buddy, what's going on?" His voice softened instinctively. The dog barked again, but this time it wasn't random. It was insistent, directed, as if trying to tell him something. His body trembled, not just from the cold but from sheer anxiety. The officer noticed something striking. Around the bulldog's neck hung a worn red collar, but no tags. His paws were raw, nails broken slightly as though he had run a long distance. The little dog darted a few steps toward the door again, then turned back, whining, before nudging at Michael's leg with his nose. It wasn't hard to understand. The dog wanted him to follow. Michael's instincts kicked in. He grabbed his flashlight, shrugged into his raincoat, and signaled to his partner on duty. "I'll be right back. Something's not right here." The bulldog bolted out the moment the door swung open again, but kept glancing over his shoulder, making sure Michael was behind him. They ran through the rain-soaked streets, puddles splashing under their feet. Michael was struck by how determined the little dog looked. Weak, thin, clearly hungry, yet unwilling to stop. After several blocks, the bulldog led him down an alley behind an abandoned warehouse. The stench of mildew and garbage clung to the air. Michael's flashlight beam cut through the shadows, revealing a sight that made his chest tighten. There, huddled against the wall beneath a sheet of torn cardboard, lay another French bulldog. This one even smaller, younger, and in terrible shape. Its breathing was shallow, ribs protruding beneath matted fur. The tiny dog barely moved, except for the faintest flick of an ear at the sound of footsteps. The first bulldog rushed to its side immediately, whining and licking the younger one's face as if begging it to stay awake. Then he turned back to Michael, those wide, glistening eyes filled with an unmistakable plea. "Help him." Michael swallowed hard, emotion catching in his throat. He dropped to his knees beside them, placing the flashlight down. He reached out carefully, his hand steady but his heart pounding. The weaker bulldog let out a faint whimper, but didn't resist when Michael gently scooped it into his arms. The warmth of his coat shielded the small, fragile body from the biting rain. The first bulldog, still dripping and shivering, pressed against his leg, refusing to be left behind. Michael nodded firmly, his jaw set. "All right, both of you. Let's get you out of here." Carrying one and guiding the other, Michael rushed back through the storm, his mind racing. How long had they been out there? Who could have abandoned them like this? He had seen neglect before in his line of work, but this two defenseless dogs left in the cold, one so close to death, hit him harder than most cases. Back at the station, Michael and his partner moved quickly. They wrapped the smaller bulldog in towels, rubbing gently to generate warmth, while the older one paced in circles, whining anxiously. Michael brewed a pot of warm water, mixing a bit of sugar to help the weaker dog regain some strength. He held the cup to its mouth, dripping liquid slowly along its tongue. Every small swallow felt like a victory. Through it all, the first bulldog never left his side. Its body was still trembling, but its eyes never wavered, glued to the smaller one, as if silently begging Michael to save him. Michael looked at the little dog and murmured, "You did good. You brought me to him. You didn't give up." And as the storm raged outside, within the quiet warmth of the police station, an unexpected bond began to form between a dedicated officer, a loyal French bulldog who had run through the rain for help, and the fragile life he had fought so desperately to protect. But would the smaller bulldog survive the night? Or had help come too late? The answer would determine whether this story ended in heartbreak or hope. The rain had slowed by the time Michael loaded both French bulldogs into the back of his cruiser. The windshield wipers squeaked rhythmically, clearing away droplets as he sped through Riverside's dimly lit streets. The older bulldog, soaked, exhausted, but fiercely alert, sat perched on the seat beside the carrier where the weaker puppy lay swaddled in towels. His eyes never left his sibling, every shallow breath of the tiny body mirrored by a worried whimper. Michael kept one hand on the wheel, the other occasionally reaching back to reassure them. "Hang on, little guy. We're almost there." His voice was steady, but inside, he was torn with urgency. In his years on the force, he had rushed people to hospitals, saved lives in dire moments, but never had he felt so personally tied to the outcome as he did now, with two small dogs depending on him. He pulled up to Riverside Veterinary Clinic, the neon open 24 hours, sign flickering against the night sky. He scooped up the frail bulldog in his arms, the weight alarmingly light, and hurried through the doors. The older ones scrambled after them, nails clicking on the tile floor as if refusing to be separated. Inside, Dr. Elaine Carter, a seasoned veterinarian with kind eyes and a reputation for never turning away an animal in need, rushed to meet him. "Michael? What happened?" "Found them in the storm," he said quickly. "This one barely breathing. I don't know how long he's been like this." He laid the puppy gently on the exam table. Elaine's expression turned grave as she listened to its chest with a stethoscope. The pup's heartbeat was faint, irregular. She looked up. "Severe hypothermia. Malnourished, possibly pneumonia. We'll do everything we can, but it's critical." The older bulldog barked once, sharp and insistent, then placed his paws against the exam table, eyes locked on Elaine as if demanding she not fail. His chest heaved with stress, but his presence was powerful. Even in silence, he was saying, "Don't give up on him." Elaine nodded gently at the dog. "Don't worry. I'm not giving up." They worked quickly, warming pads beneath the pup, for fluids threaded into his tiny vein, oxygen mask fitted to his muzzle. Each beep of the monitor was a lifeline, fragile but steadying. Michael stood nearby, drenched and weary, his police radio still clipped to his belt. But his focus was entirely here. He reached down to stroke the older bulldog's damp fur. "You did everything you could. You got him here. Now it's on us." Hours passed in slow motion. The storm outside subsided, leaving the world eerily quiet, broken only by the soft hum of machines and the dog's faint, rattling breaths. Michael sat in the corner, jacket draped over his shoulders, while the older bulldog curled against his boots, eyes never leaving the table. They were a team now, both guardians waiting for the verdict. At dawn, Elaine emerged from the treatment room. Her expression softened into cautious relief. "He's stable for now, still weak but responding to the fluids and warmth. The next 24 hours will be crucial." Michael let out a breath he didn't realize he was holding. The older bulldog stood, tail wagging faintly, ears perked, as if he understood every word. He nudged Michael's hand, then trotted to the exam room to check on his sibling. Inside, the pup lay curled on a blanket, hooked to wires but breathing more steadily. His tiny chest rose and fell with newfound strength. The older bulldog immediately settled beside him, pressing his body close, offering the warmth and comfort only a brother could give. Michael watched, his throat tightening. In that small, fragile moment, he realized something profound. Loyalty wasn't just a human trait. This little dog had braved the storm, run to strangers and begged for help, all to save his family. Elaine placed a hand on Michael's arm. They'll need care, food, shelter, probably weeks of recovery. Do you know what you're going to do with them? Michael hesitated. His life was already complicated. A demanding job, long shifts, a small apartment with barely enough room for himself. Taking in 2 neglected dogs wasn't part of his plan. Yet as he looked at the bulldogs, the answer seemed clearer than anything he'd ever faced. I don't know yet, he admitted softly, but I'm not leaving them. The older bulldog glanced back at him, eyes glistening with something almost human. Trust, gratitude, a bond had been forged, unspoken yet undeniable. As the sun broke through the clouds, casting warm light across the clinic, Michael realized this wasn't just a rescue mission. It was the beginning of something much larger. Something that would test his resilience, challenge his choices, and change his life forever. But the road ahead wouldn't be easy. The bulldog's past still lingered in scars and hunger, and Michael would soon face the painful question. Who had abandoned them in the first place, and what if they tried to take them back? The story was only beginning. The following days blurred together in a rhythm of worry and fragile hope. Every morning before reporting for duty, Michael returned to the veterinary clinic. He would find the 2 French bulldogs curled together in the kennel. One still weak but slowly gaining strength, the other standing guard as if he were both protector and nurse. The stronger bulldog, whom Michael had started calling Shadow because of the way he followed him everywhere, greeted him with a soft bark each time. His body still bore the marks of neglect, patches of fur missing, ribs faintly visible, but his spirit was ironclad. The younger one, smaller and more vulnerable, was beginning to respond to treatment. Michael named him Hope, a word that had echoed in his mind the night he found them. On his 3rd visit, Elaine smiled as Michael entered. Your boys are fighters, she said warmly. Hope's lungs are clearing, and Shadow hasn't left his side. It's remarkable. They've survived this long because of each other. Michael crouched by the kennel, his uniform still damp from the drizzle outside. Shadow pressed his nose through the bars, tail wagging faintly. Hope stirred, opening his eyes just long enough to catch sight of Michael before drifting back to sleep. The officer's hand lingered on the bars, his chest tightening. He had always thought of himself as a man of duty, but this bond pulling at him was different. But with each visit came the same question Elaine had asked. What will you do with them? At home, Michael's apartment felt smaller than ever. A 1-bedroom above a laundromat, cluttered with case files and half-read books, hardly seemed like the place for 2 dogs recovering from neglect. Yet every time he imagined leaving them behind, hoping someone else might step forward, he felt a sharp sting of guilt. Shadow had trusted him that night in the rain. Hope had clung to life because Michael answered the call. Could he really walk away now? That evening, as he sat with his partner in the station, the subject arose. Officer Daniels, a younger recruit with a habit of reading people too easily, raised an eyebrow. So what's the deal with those bulldogs you rescued? Word around town is you're becoming a dog dad. Michael chuckled, though his smile was thin. I haven't decided yet. They deserve more than I can give. Daniels leaned back in his chair. Funny thing, though, dogs don't care about square footage or polished floors. They care about showing up. And you already did that. The words lingered long after their shift ended. That night, Michael returned to the clinic one last time before bed. Shadow perked up instantly, barking once in recognition. Michael opened the kennel, and for the first time, Shadow stepped directly into his arms, pressing his head against his chest. It was a simple act, yet it shattered the wall Michael had been trying to hold. All right? He whispered into Shadow's damp fur. I hear you. I'm not letting go. The next morning, paperwork and reality set in. Elaine explained the steps for official adoption, microchipping, medical releases, and the promise of follow-up care. Michael signed his name slowly, feeling the weight of the decision. It wasn't just about rescuing them from the storm anymore. It was about giving them a future. but not everyone approved. That afternoon, Michael's sister, Claire, called after hearing the news. "Michael, you can't be serious. 2 dogs? With your hours? You can barely keep yourself on a decent schedule." He listened quietly, staring out the window at the rain-washed streets. She wasn't wrong. His life was unpredictable, often consumed by emergencies. But when he thought of Shadow's desperate eyes in the storm, of Hope's fragile breath rising under Elaine's care, doubt gave way to resolve. "They don't have anyone else, Claire," he said firmly. "And I'm not walking away from them." There was silence on the line before she sighed. "You've always had a stubborn heart. Just make sure you know what you're getting into." That evening, as Michael drove them home for the first time, Shadow sat proudly in the passenger seat, while Hope dozed in a crate lined with blankets. For once, the cruiser wasn't filled with tension or static from the radio. Instead, it carried the quiet hum of new beginnings. At his apartment, Shadow trotted in eagerly, sniffing every corner with curious energy. Hope, still fragile, curled into a soft bed Elaine had provided. Michael sat on the floor between them, exhaustion etched in his features but softened by a smile he hadn't worn in years. He didn't know what challenges lay ahead: vet bills, long nights, juggling duty with care. But in that moment, he knew one thing with certainty. They were no longer just 2 abandoned dogs. They were family. And though the bond had been born in rain and desperation, it was growing stronger by the hour. But Michael had no idea that their past wasn't as distant as he hoped. And soon, shadows of the life they had escaped would come knocking, testing just how far his newfound loyalty could stretch. For the first time in years, Michael's apartment felt alive. The once quiet space above the laundromat echoed with the sound of paws against hardwood, the occasional bark, and the gentle rhythm of breathing as Shadow and Hope slept side by side. Michael's routine had changed overnight. Early walks before his shift, bowls of food set carefully by the kitchen counter, and a newfound sense of responsibility that was both exhausting and grounding. Still, as days turned into weeks, peace was fragile. The Bulldog's bodies were healing, but their eyes told a deeper story. Shadow startled easily at sudden noises, and Hope whimpered in his sleep, paws twitching as if running from ghosts only he could see. Michael reassured them with steady hands and quiet words, but deep down he wondered, what had they been through before the night of the storm? The answer came sooner than expected. It was a Saturday afternoon when Michael stopped by the vet for a follow-up appointment. Elaine greeted them warmly, checking Hope's lungs and smiling at the progress. "They're getting stronger," she said. "Stronger because of you." Before Michael could reply, the clinic door swung open. A man in his late 30s stormed inside, his clothes disheveled, his eyes narrowing the moment they landed on the Bulldogs. Shadow instantly stiffened, growling low in his throat, while Hope pressed against Michael's leg. "There they are," the man barked, pointing a finger. "Those are my dogs." Michael rose slowly, his body tensing. "Excuse me?" The man's voice grew louder. "I lost them weeks ago. Been looking everywhere. You have no right keeping them." Elaine stepped between them, her tone calm but firm. "Sir, these dogs were found abandoned, malnourished and near death. If they were yours, why weren't they reported missing? Why didn't you come sooner?" The man shifted, avoiding her gaze. "That's none of your business. They're mine, and I want them back." Michael's jaw clenched. Shadow's growl deepened, his stance protective, as if every scar on his body was proof of the truth. Michael knelt beside him, resting a steadying hand on his back. "Dogs don't lie," he said coldly. "And judging by the way they react to you, I don't believe for a second they were cared for." The man's face reddened. "You're just a cop playing hero. Hand them over or I'll make sure the law does." Elaine crossed her arms. "The law already knows. They were rescued, treated, and now legally under Michael's guardianship. Unless you have proof of ownership and vet records, which I doubt, you have no case." The man cursed under his breath, his anger flashing. For a moment, Michael braced for him to lunge forward. Instead, he sneered. "This isn't over. You'll regret stealing what's mine." Then he stormed out, the door slamming hard behind him. The room fell silent except for the pounding of Michael's heart. Shadow slowly relaxed, pressing against his side, while Hope whimpered softly. Michael rubbed their ears, whispering, "You're safe, I promise." But inside, doubt gnawed at him. The man's words weren't empty. People who mistreated animals often saw them as property, not lives. And if he tried to fight through legal loopholes, Michael could find himself in a battle he wasn't prepared for. That night, as the bulldogs slept curled together at his feet, Michael sat at his kitchen table, the glow of a single lamp illuminating the papers in front of him. He began researching animal cruelty cases, adoption laws, and legal protections. His badge gave him access to certain resources, but this was personal now. Claire called again, sensing the weight in his voice. "Michael, what's wrong?" He explained everything, the man, the threats, the risk of losing Shadow and Hope. Claire sighed heavily. "You knew this wouldn't be easy, but maybe this is the test. You always wanted purpose outside the badge. Maybe this is it." Her words echoed long after the call ended. Michael looked down at Shadow, who had padded over silently, resting his head on Michael's lap. The bulldog's eyes were steady, filled with trust, as if saying, "Don't give up on us now." Michael stroked his fur, his voice a whisper. "I won't. Not ever." But he knew the fight was just beginning. The past they had escaped was reaching back, and if he wasn't careful, it could take them away. The question wasn't whether he loved them enough. It was whether he had the strength to protect them from a world that didn't always see dogs as family. And as the rain began again outside, tapping softly against the windows, Michael realized one truth. Love was never enough on its own. Courage would be the real test. The week after the confrontation at the vet clinic passed in uneasy silence. Michael tried to keep things normal. Morning walks with Shadow, spoon-feeding Hope when his appetite faltered. Late nights spent stretched out on the couch with both dogs nestled against him. Yet, even in these moments of peace, his mind replayed the man's words. This isn't over. The warning hung over him like a storm cloud, and soon it broke. On Friday afternoon, as Michael wrapped up a shift at the precinct, he was called into the captain's office. Captain Harris, a grizzled veteran with decades of experience, gestured toward a folder on his desk. "Got a complaint filed against you, Michael. Guy claims you stole his dogs." Michael's stomach dropped. He didn't need to ask who. He walked in with photos. Harris continued, flipping through the documents. 2 French bulldogs. One older, one younger. Same markings. Says their names are Duke and Tiny. Claims you've been withholding his property. Michael clenched his jaw. Those dogs were starved, neglected, abandoned. If they were his, he doesn't deserve them back. Harris sighed, rubbing his temples. "I don't disagree, but he's got paperwork, a breeder's receipt, old vet bills. It looks legitimate, and until this is settled, it's a civil matter. You need to be ready." Michael left the office with the folder in hand, anger simmering beneath his uniform. At home, Shadow greeted him eagerly, bounding to the door, while Hope wagged his tail weakly from the couch. Michael dropped to his knees, burying his face in their fur. "They're trying to take you back," he whispered, his voice breaking. "But I won't let it happen." That night, he laid the documents out on his kitchen table. The receipts were dated, the vet bills old but real. Whoever the man was, he had just enough proof to make trouble. Michael called Elaine, his voice tight with frustration. "He has papers. Receipts, vet records. How do we fight this?" Elaine's reply was calm but firm. "Paperwork doesn't prove care. The condition they were in when you found them is evidence enough of neglect. Take photos. Document everything, their weight, the scars, their progress under your care. Build a case not just on who owned them, but who protected them." So Michael did. He snapped photos of Shadow's healing skin, of Hope's improving strength. He gathered vet reports, testimonies from Elaine, even statements from neighbors who had seen the dogs thriving under his care. Each piece of evidence wasn't just paperwork, it was a story of survival. Still, the fear gnawed at him. Shadow seemed to sense it, pressing close whenever Michael grew quiet, while Hope leaned against his chest at night, his fragile body radiating warmth that Michael now couldn't imagine living without. The confrontation came sooner than expected. 2 weeks later, Michael opened his door to find the man standing there. This time in a clean jacket, holding a folder thick with documents. "You can't keep them forever," the man sneered. "The law's on my side. I'll get them back, and there's nothing you can do." Shadow lunged forward, barking ferociously, his body a shield in front of Michael. Hope whimpered but stayed close, as if knowing the battle wasn't physical. It was about fate. Michael stepped outside, closing the door behind him. His voice was low, steady, dangerous. "You left them to die. You call that ownership? A receipt doesn't erase cruelty. And I'll fight you with every resource I have." The man's lips curled into a smirk. "We'll see what the judge thinks." That night, Michael sat awake, Shadow curled at his feet, Hope asleep in his arms. His thoughts churned like a storm, memories of finding them in the rain, of Shadow's desperate run to the station, of Hope's shallow breaths on the vet's table. He had thought the hardest part was saving their lives. But now he realized the true battle had only begun. Not against the storm or hunger, but against a system that too often treated dogs as property, not souls. Michael whispered into the darkness, more a vow than a prayer. "You're not going back. I'll stand for you, no matter what it takes." Shadow lifted his head, eyes locking with Michael's. It was as if he understood the promise. And in that gaze, Michael found the strength he needed, not just as a cop, but as the man who had chosen to fight for them. The war for Shadow and Hope's future had officially begun. Michael had faced dangerous criminals, high-speed chases, and even life-threatening shootouts during his years as an officer. But nothing compared to the helplessness he felt now. Sitting at his kitchen table with files scattered everywhere, Shadow curled at his feet, and Hope asleep in the crook of his arm. The man's threats replayed in his mind like a broken record. "The law's on my side. The judge will decide." For the first time, Michael doubted himself. What if the system failed these dogs? What if a stack of receipts outweighed the truth of scars and trauma? Elaine's words anchored him. Document everything. So he did. He spent evenings cataloging photos of the Bulldog's malnourished bodies the night they were found, vet reports of infections and untreated conditions, and receipts for every piece of care he had provided since. Still, as thorough as he was, a knot of fear tightened in his chest. One rainy evening, Claire stopped by unannounced. She had been skeptical before, but the sight that greeted her as she walked into Michael's apartment silenced her doubts. Shadow bounding over with cautious joy, Hope nestled warmly in a blanket, and Michael. His stern exterior softened, gently stroking them both. "You look tired," Claire said, setting down a bag of groceries she'd brought. Michael chuckled dryly. "That's because I am. It feels like I'm fighting a war I don't know how to win." Claire sat across from him, her expression thoughtful. "You always take the world on your shoulders, Michael. But this time you don't have to do it alone. Let me help. These dogs aren't just yours anymore. They're ours." Her words cracked something inside him. For weeks, he had carried the burden in silence. But now, with Claire's support, he felt the faint stirrings of hope. Together, they organized the evidence into a binder, building a story page by page. One not just of survival, but of transformation. At the precinct, Michael sought advice from a lawyer who occasionally worked with the department. The attorney, a sharp woman named Julia, leafed through the documents with raised brows. "You've got a strong case," she said finally. "But remember, courts can be unpredictable. He has receipts, yes, but cruelty and neglect can outweigh ownership. The key will be witnesses and professional testimony. Can your vet testify?" "Elaine would," Michael said without hesitation. "Good. And you," Julia added, looking him squarely in the eye. "You're not just their rescuer. You're their guardian. Don't hide your emotions in court. Show them what these dogs mean to you. Judges see hundreds of cases. Make them remember this one." Michael nodded, though the thought of standing in court, exposing his heart in such a vulnerable way, made him uneasy. Still, he would do it. For Shadow. For Hope. The nights grew heavier as the court date drew closer. Michael often lay awake, listening to the steady rhythm of shadows breathing on the floor beside his bed. The softer breaths of hope nestled near his chest. Each sound reminded him of how close he had come to losing them that stormy night, and how close he was to losing them again. One night, as he stared at the ceiling, Shadow jumped onto the bed uninvited, pressing his warm body against Michael's side. Hope stirred, yawning before snuggling even closer. The officer closed his eyes, overwhelmed by the quiet solidarity of two creatures who had survived so much. "Whatever happens," he whispered, his voice cracking, "I'm with you, to the end." But shadows lingered. Twice, Michael noticed a car idling near his apartment building, a dark sedan with tinted windows. Shadow growled at the window, his instincts sharpening. Michael's training told him it wasn't coincidence. The man wasn't just waiting for court. He was watching. The realization only fueled Michael's resolve. He wasn't just fighting for custody. He was fighting against a man who saw lives as property, who would rather intimidate than care. The next morning, he filed an official report of harassment and spoke to his captain. Harris, though cautious, placed a hand on his shoulder. "You're doing the right thing, son. Don't let him rattle you. And remember, you're not just a cop here. You're a man who's found something worth protecting." The week before court, Elaine invited Michael to the clinic for one last checkup. Hope, though still smaller than most pups his age, had gained weight and strength. Shadow, with his scars fading under new fur, wagged his tail proudly. "They're thriving," Elaine said softly. "Not because of medicine alone, because of love. That's something no receipt can buy." Michael swallowed hard, his throat tight. He crouched, wrapping his arms around both dogs as they pressed into him, tails wagging. In that embrace, he found his answer to every fear, every doubt. Love wasn't fragile, it was armor. And when the day came, he would walk into that courtroom with Shadow and Hope by his side, not just as evidence, but as proof of what truly mattered. The fight wasn't over. In fact, it was about to begin. The courtroom smelled faintly of old wood and polished floors, its tall windows letting in pale beams of morning light. Michael sat at the petitioner's table, his uniform replaced by a simple suit, his heart pounding harder than it ever had during any police assignment. Beside him, Shadow lay calmly at his feet, protective as always, while Hope nestled in a small blanket on Claire's lap just behind him. On the other side of the room sat the man, his jaw tight, his folder of documents stacked neatly on the table. He looked confident, as though this were already won. "All rise," the bailiff called. The judge, a stern woman with years etched into her face, took her seat. After the formalities, the case was called, a custody dispute over two French bulldogs. To some, it might have seemed trivial compared to the weightier matters the court often handled. But to Michael, it was life itself. The man's attorney went first, presenting receipts, vet bills, and photographs. "My client purchased these dogs legally and has documentation to prove ownership. They are his property, and he is entitled to have them returned." Michael's fists clenched. Property. The word made his stomach turn. Then it was Julia's turn. Calm and precise, she laid out the evidence Michael had gathered. Photographs of Shadow scars, Hope's emaciated frame, medical reports detailing untreated infections, and testimony letters from Elaine and neighbors. "These dogs were not found in a state of care," Julia said firmly. "They were found abandoned, neglected, and near death. The man who claims them now had every chance to prove love and responsibility, and instead, he proved cruelty." The judge listened silently, her gaze shifting between the papers and the animals themselves. Shadow lifted his head at one point, his dark eyes steady, as if silently pleading his own case. Hope, small and fragile but alive, licked Michael's hand as though to remind him why he was here. Then it was Michael's turn to speak. His palms were damp, but when he rose, his voice carried steady. "I've been a police officer for over a decade," he began, locking eyes with the judge. "I've seen neglect. I've seen cruelty. I've seen people abandon responsibility when it mattered most. That night, when Shadow ran into the station, I didn't see property begging for help. I saw lives begging for a chance. And when I held Hope in my arms at the clinic, barely breathing, I made a promise that if they survived, I would protect them. Always. His voice cracked, but he didn't stop. He gestured toward the man across the room. He may have receipts, but receipts don't explain scars. Receipts don't heal ribs that show through skin. Receipts don't calm nightmares or win trust back. Love does. Care does. And these dogs they've chosen. Look at them. They don't fear me. They don't hide. They live. For a long moment, the courtroom was silent. Even Claire, sitting behind him, wiped at her eyes. The man, however, stood abruptly, his temper flaring. They're mine. I paid for them. He stole them. The judge raised a hand. Enough. Sit down. When closing arguments ended, the judge leaned back, her gaze thoughtful. She was quiet for what felt like an eternity, then spoke. This court recognizes ownership when it is proven, but ownership does not absolve neglect. It does not excuse cruelty. These dogs were found in a state no responsible owner would allow. And while paperwork may show transactions, it does not show love. She paused, her voice firm. Therefore, custody of the French Bulldogs, Shadow and Hope, will remain permanently with Officer Michael Carter. The gavel struck. For a moment, Michael couldn't breathe. The tension in his chest collapsed into a flood of relief. Claire let out a gasp, clutching Hope tighter, while Shadow barked once, his tail wagging as though he understood every word. The man cursed, his chair scraping violently as he stormed out, but Michael didn't watch him go. He was already kneeling, wrapping his arms around Shadow, who licked his face with unrestrained joy. Hope wiggled in Claire's arms, yipping softly. Tears blurred Michael's vision. "You're home," he whispered. "For good." That evening, back at the apartment, Michael watched as Shadow and Hope curled together on the couch, their bodies warm against each other, their breathing deep and steady. The rain tapped gently against the windows, but this time it wasn't a storm. It was a lullaby. Michael sat nearby, Claire's hand resting in his, and felt something he hadn't in years. Peace. These weren't just dogs he had rescued. They were family. And together, they had proven that love, courage, and perseverance could overcome even the darkest battles. If this story touched your heart, make sure to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and share it with someone who loves inspiring stories. Together, we can spread messages of courage, loyalty, and hope, just like Shadow and Hope's.